Oh, all right. It's 2:02 now. I think we can get started. So hello, welcome to Ask Seminar series. I'm John, the seminar coordinator. I will be moderating the seminar with our communication specialist, Kathy Madney, our associate director, Ralph Ferrero, and also join us, and Ralph will be introducing the speaker. Just so you know that the seminar is being recorded and we will publish the recording on our YouTube channel. It usually takes a week or so, so please feel free to check it out. And after the presentation, we'll have the Q&A session. So please feel free to bring up any questions you have, and you can unmute yourself and ask a verbal question, or you can chat out your questions and we'll read them out. So before the speaker gets started, I will hand this over to our Associate Director, Ralph Ferrero, and he will be introducing the speaker. So Ralph, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, it's a pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Professor Lori Magruder from the University of Texas, Department of Aerospace Engineering and Engineering Mechanics. Lori's also the science team lead for the ICESat mission, and just looking over your bio here. It's got engineering degrees from USC, Princeton, and the University of Texas. She also spent some time at JPL and Applied Physics Lab, which isn't too far from us here in College Park. And she's back at Texas as an associate professor, and look forward to learning a bit about ICESat.
Thank you. Give me just a minute and I'll share my screen. I did practice this, so I think it works. How's that look? Okay.
That's great.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks so much for having me. I was super excited to receive the invitation. ESSEC has long been a place that I've admired, and such good research has come out of that it's fun to be here now and talk to you. I've been privileged to work with some of the researchers there and continue to collaborate with them. So this was great. I'm here in some ways to talk about all things ICESat-2, the Ice Cloud and Land Elevation Satellite-2. My title is pretty broad because I just think there's a whole lot of stuff packed into this presentation. So hopefully there's something for everyone in terms of details about the mission. If we wanted to look over a little bit more specifically of what I'd like to cover today is an introduction to the work that I've been doing here at UT out of the Center for Space Research. So I'll tell you a bit about that. And then we'll dive into a mission overview. If you're not familiar with ICESat-2, I'll add a few of the details. If you've worked on it for a long time, then this will just be review. I'll tell you about the current status and the data product quality. And then I wanted to highlight a few science applications. And these are not my research results, but some of the recent discoveries by colleagues or collaborators. And it's certainly not comprehensive, because I think what you'll learn today is that ICESat-2 measurements have just served in a broad sense a lot of scientific disciplines. Since we're doing global measurements of our Earth's surfaces, it's just been really amazing, all of the unique research that's come out of these data products and data set. And then the new topic that I wanted to talk a little bit more about is coastal bathymetry, as we are looking to develop a new product devoted to coastal bathymetry and the capabilities of ICESat-2 for nearshore processes and benthic habitat mapping. So right now, as Ralph mentioned, I'm an associate professor in the aerospace department. I also act as the interim director of the Center for Space Research. So that is an organized research unit in the Cockrell School of Engineering here at UT. We're one of the larger ORUs in the Cockrell School with 47 full-time research staff. These are all soft money scientists. We have 9 faculty affiliates. I'm one of those 9. There's other faculty that are also aerospace faculty, but a lot of the work of CSR draws in our Jackson School of Geosciences faculty, as well as the College of Natural Sciences. And then we have a big contingent of graduate research assistants. The GRAs were about at 28, as we support through our sponsored research their their work towards a master's or a PhD degree. We have pretty diverse funding sources from NASA or JPL to Army and Air Force and National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, with the crux of our research revolving around remote sensing, satellite geodesy, 3D geospatial sciences, and then also can support a lot of operational aspects of missions, such as precision orbit determination, pointing determination. We do many cases of data product development, generation, and then actually dissemination to the community. Some of the major NASA missions that CSR has supported are ISAT and then GRACE and GRACE follow-on. We have big footprints in all of those missions. And as Ralph mentioned, the ISAT-2, we do a lot with that in terms of science team participation and data product generation. My group that I run is called 3DGL, the 3D Geospatial Laboratory. We're looking at all altitudes of remote sensing with different sensor phenomenologies and trying to develop innovative algorithms that can conflate data together to do some better value added in terms of scene inference and scene classification or feature extraction, and then work toward data metrics and data validation techniques as well. So in terms of ISAT-2, it's, as you would have guessed, is the successor to the original ISAT, which was operational from 2003 to 2009. It's an Earth observing laser altimetry mission. And it ultimately was born out of the list of top priorities in the 2007 Earth Decadal Survey that really emphasized the need for laser altimetry in our polar regions for cryospheric studies and time series of change. So that in 2008, the concept came around and started to develop. We had the advantage with ISAT-2 to have lessons learned from the original ISAT, as it was limited in some ways due to the technology of the laser altimeter on board, as well as the way that the mission was implemented. But we could leverage that knowledge and come up with something to satisfy those limitations for the next orbit. We launched successfully in September of 2018. So we've been almost 4.5 years on orbit. And we're near polar. We're at a 92-degree inclination, which means we reach 88 south to 88 north, and really are operating continuously. So we're getting global height measurements, as I mentioned, over every surface of the Earth has to offer. In terms of status, today, April 17th, is the 1,675th day on orbit since our launch in September. The instrument on board, ISAT-2, is ATLAS, the Advanced Topographic Laser Altimetry System, and it's really a state-of-the-art laser altimeter, which is a photon-counting LiDAR. Now, photon-counting is as it sounds. It's sensitive to individual photon reflections from the surface. If you're not so familiar with altimetry, I'll just take a brief minute to explain it. It's taking a laser in space and releasing laser energy towards the surface of the Earth, detecting that return, precisely timing that time of flight of the energy travel, and then calculating a range between the instrument and the surface. That range is combined with satellite geodesy in terms of precision orbit determination and attitude determination to produce a latitude, longitude, and height for every detected photon in this case. This is pretty amazing and has allowed a lot of technical advancement in terms of how we do the collection for the LiDAR. We turned on the ATLAS laser October 1st, and it's to date and counting over 1.3 trillion laser pulses. Everything remains pretty nominal. I think one of the neatest technical achievements of ATLAS, in my opinion, is the laser. It's super stable, and it, in the 4.5 years of operation at a high repetition rate, which I'll talk about in a minute, it's only lost about 10% of its energy from when we turned it on back in September or October of 2018. And we have a knob on that laser that can go from level 1 to level 11. We're currently just turned it up to level 5 to recover that 10% that was lost previous setting, and now we're back to where we started, which is really encouraging in terms of that's not going to be one of the on-orbit consumables that limits the lifetime of the mission. Again, everything else, even other subsystems remain nominal and within requirements. We've only had a couple of on-orbit anomalies that have put us into safe mode and shut some things down while we recover why that happened or why we exceeded a threshold operation value, and everything seems really good. We ended our prime mission in December of 2021, so we were required 3 years on orbit operations to satisfy that. At that point, we moved into extended mission operations, which was a separate budget for about 2 years of keeping the lights on operationally, as well as pursuing some new science research and development. We the project office just last week submitted the proposal for the senior review cycle, which is the normal 3-year cadence of those on-orbit Earth observing systems that are beyond their prime mission and need to get in the usual sequence of funding from NASA to keep going with their space-based operations. As I mentioned, I said the Atlas is a photon counting system, and when you operate in photon counting mode, you can use a lower energy level of the laser, which means we can operate at a higher repetition rate. That's 10 kilohertz that Atlas is using, and based on a 500-kilometer altitude, you're going to get in a long track measurement every 70 centimeters with multiple beams. So we split one laser beam into 6 beams and configure it into 3 beam pairs. So you can see the configuration here in this schematic. Each pair is comprised of a high and relatively lower energy level, and that's to accommodate dynamic range and surface reflectivity. And the across-track separation between the components in a pair is 90 meters, and then each pair themselves is separated by 3.3 kilometers in the cross-track. This was an answer to one of the limitations in the original ISAT, which had a single beam laser altimeter, and it was really hard to disentangle surface slope from elevation change given repeat measurements. So with this multi-beam configuration, we now can measure local and somewhat regional surface slope and make sure that that ambiguity is not a problem. Other thing I'll mention is that it's at a 532 nanometer wavelength of the laser energy is visibly green. And that's different than ISAT, which was IR. And that was an artifact of that we were using photomultiplier tubes. And at the time, the only radiation hardened PMTs available operated in the visible wavelength. So we chose green just by availability of the technology, when in fact, it then provides us one of the things I will talk about later with bathymetry, because infrared does not penetrate water, but 532 is often the selected wavelength for bathymetric LiDAR systems. And so we ultimately put a space-based bathymeter up there without really having an idea of the impact that it would have. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. The data looks something like this. Some of you might have looked at transects and transects of data, but this I thought I'd show in case you haven't. This is the level 2 data product called ATLO3. It's the global geolocated point cloud, if you will, or photon cloud. Each of these black dots is a detected photon at Atlas receiver, and each one has a latitude, longitude, and height value. In this plot, we're going in the long track direction in the x-axis on the bottom, and then the y-axis is relative height in meters. This is over west central Greenland, and it's very reflective. So we have a high density of photons that identify the surface. So if you look at this, it's clear where the surface is. We're even seeing some little melt ponds where we see the top of the melt pond surface and then the melt pond basin below it. All of these other dots that looks like white noise is solar background noise, so that the system's very susceptible to background noise. So it's a lot of statistical analysis and automation to do the signal finding and interpretation of these types of data, and it's a large volume of data as well. ATLO3 is the input to all of the higher level or level 3 surface specific products that cover land ice, sea ice, land and vegetation, ocean, inland water, and I think that's all right now. Those are long track products that are optimized for surface reflectivity and topography and kind of the needs of those specific communities that those products are serving in terms of aggregation or length scales of aggregating photons. We're now at the level of accumulating enough data on orbit that we can start producing higher level products, which are gridded or raster products that kind of give you a wider spatial view of elevation or height and changes. We have 2 atmospheric products or 4 atmospheric products that tell us the vertical span of 14 kilometers in our atmosphere, tell us a lot about vertical cloud structure and aerosol concentrations. ISAT-2 is a global altimeter, but when I like this visual because it shows you really that we don't have a whole lot of spatial coverage. We have a lot of tracks that cover the Earth, but we really are just looking at pencil lines of elevation coverage over the Earth. But what ISAT-2 has also been really powerful at is adding its absolute vertical to wider spatial, maybe imagery or passive sensor data to have the best of both worlds, to see in a wider sense what's happening, but then also have that vertical that in a really high accuracy measurement. This is highlighting the ATL-08, the land and vegetation product that's produced here at CSR by Dr. Amy Neuenschwander. You can see here there's a lot of noise. There's photon returns from trees and from ground. The signal finding in ATL-08 picks these out and then classifies these as separate surfaces for top of canopy, mid canopy, and terrain. This is really important to know the canopy heights globally because that feeds into our estimates of above ground biomass. How accurate is this data? Well, I think Kelly Brunt is on, Dr. Kelly Brunt, and she could tell us about this, but one of the biggest and most impactful validation efforts to validate the vertical quality of ISAT-2 data is what's called the 88 South Ground Traverse. It's a multi-year traverse using GPS along the 88 South latitude line in Antarctica. This is really important in terms of just the outright vertical accuracy of the ISAT-2 data for scientific use, that you could tell the community what they were getting. It identified biases and then established the precision of the measurements. It allows us to validate that data. It also allows us to monitor the performance of the instrument over time as the instrument and the observatory start to go towards end of life. And then additionally, as you look at this plot here on the right of the biases over time, really, it also breaks it out in terms of spots. So we have 6 beams, as I mentioned, and some of them, I think this is what Kelly's saying, some of them make good decisions and some of them don't, but they're all different, like children, and so we can monitor the variable performance depending on which spot is your favorite. In terms of geolocation accuracy, one of the methods that we've used are passive optics on the ground, corner cube retroreflectors. We put those at certain locations in arrays or patterns, and when the satellite flies over them and illuminates these small optics, they provide a special signature back at the receiver, and we can compare the geolocation that signature was given to the known locations of the corner cubes on the surface, and then get an offset in latitude and longitude or along track and cross track of how accurate the data is. The mission requirement is 6.5 meters, but a lot of these efforts have shown that it's actually better than 3 meters. Given that these are single points in the orbit and there's a lot of thermomechanical variability on orbit, it's not always everywhere 3 meters, but other efforts that maybe use ISAT-2 data to compare to airborne elevation reference data have gotten some similar numbers. When you hit multiple corner cubes in one pass, then you get some geometric solution in terms of estimating the footprint diameter. So that also allowed us to determine that the spot diameter of each of the beams is about 11 meters. That's a little different than pre-launch estimate of 17. But it's a cool independent way to evaluate that parameter. So we've gone over the mission kind of overview, the status and the quality of the data, but I want to get into a little bit of the science that ISAT-2 is allowing to be done. And like I said, it covers a broad or a very diverse number of scientific communities. What I think is so amazing, to be honest, is the fact that this height measurement at the global scale is serving so many of the primary variables that are of interest to all of us in terms of understanding better Earth's response to climate change. And you can see here whether it's atmosphere or nearshore environments or biomass and carbon estimates. it's really served well by this continual and repeat height measurement. I'm going to talk a little bit about some recent discoveries. Again, it's not comprehensive, but it kind of shows you a little bit more in depth about the utility of ISAT-2. One of the level 1 science requirements of ISAT-2 was that it be able to determine whole ice sheet elevation change at the decadal scale. And what happened then in 2020 was Ben Smith from University of Washington put together a manuscript with a lot of other colleagues and collaborators on doing that by using ISAT elevation change time series and stitching it together with ISAT-2, and then getting full mass balance maps for Greenland and Antarctica, which is really quite amazing because it's in such high resolution. This paper that I wanted to highlight, it goes a little one step beyond what the Smith et al. Paper did, and that was from Johan Nielsen, where they added in the ISAT and ISAT-2 time series to the previous missions from that using radar altimetry. So you can see here that they again on the right plot is a spatial distribution of the mass balance for 36-year record using 7 different contributing missions. The red area here in Antarctica are areas of mass loss or ablation, and then the blue are accumulation. And you can see all of the variability depending on where you are geographically. What I like to do is I'm a big promoter of laser altimetry. It's kind of my favorite technology. And this tells me a little bit why in the plot to the left, where what it's plotting is surface slope on the x-axis and then standard deviation, basically a measure of the error, vertical error of each of the missions, which are represented by a different line, the 7 missions, which each have a different color line. When the surface gets more dynamic or there's a higher slope, any geolocation error then translates into vertical error. So you can understand why there's this linear trend from low slope to high slope. But the brown line and the pink line are ISAT and ISAT-2 respectively, and they are showing such tremendous capability in highly accurate vertical measurements for these types of time series derivations. There's also several level 1 science requirements associated with sea ice, and I'm going to talk about one sea ice study in the Southern Ocean, but I'm going to stay away from sea ice because I know Essex has one of the leading sea ice scientists, and certainly in Professor Sinead Farrell, who's that scientist and also an expert in ISAT-2 for sea ice. I know that you have in-house a lot of more information about ISAT-2 for sea ice research. But this one was from, this study is Melinda Webster and colleagues in looking at off of the, understanding that in February last year, there was a record low for sea ice extent in the Southern Ocean. And most of the time, sea ice thickness and then snow depth on top of the sea ice is measured using passive microwave sensors. But now, since the launch of ISAT-2, we can use ISAT-2 with the microwave measurements to look at trends and patterns or variability in those parameters. The plots on the left show on the top is the anomaly or departure from the mean for sea ice thickness. So you can see where areas are thinner and thicker. We have more thinning area in the Ross sector, whereas the Weddell Sea is more neutral or maybe thicker sectors. And then snow depth is the plot below. Also a variable depending geographically of where you are. These plots here, the lines are the years. So black, blue, and red are 19, 20, and 21 in terms of sea ice thickness for the variable areas, and then snow depth on the left. I find this super interesting of how different the patterns and variability is in the Arctic relative to the Antarctic, which makes sense, right? Where you have sea ice surrounded by land masses in the Arctic, and now you have a big land mass surrounded by sea ice in the Southern Ocean. And I think there's it's very interesting, at least to me, not a sea ice scientist, to think about what's being discovered in terms of ocean and atmospheric forcings on the sea ice extent and thickness and snow depth. We talked a little bit about vegetation with the movie and how ATL-08 goes in and finds signal from vegetation structure, and the terrain below. What I will highlight here is because of the reach of ISAT-2, meaning the inclination at 92 degrees inclination orbit, we're also getting measurements of the boreal forest. And why that's important is, although I'm sure many of you in Maryland know about the JEDI mission, the laser altimeter on the space station, which has done an amazing job of terrestrial ecosystem mapping for temperate and tropical forests. But it's not reaching higher than latitudes of 51.5 degrees, if you will. So now that we have ISAT-2 measurements and over the course of time, Laura Duncanson a couple years ago with many colleagues using Amy Neuenschwander's product, created a boreal forest above ground biomass density map, which the impactfulness of this is stitching it together to JEDI biomass maps to get a better assessment of global carbon storage. And then the last science highlight is more hydrology based, and Daniel Shearer last year looked at the inland water product, ATL-13, and started to get a temporal spatial time series of surface slope and river networks to understand better discharge. This product has also been used to inventory reservoirs, if you will, and then link those changes, volumetric changes in the surface water, to community needs or societal policies, which has been really an interesting line of research for sure. As I mentioned, the green laser wavelength has allowed ISAT-2 to penetrate the surface of the water and give us returns from the seafloor beneath. Because no one really thought that 300 miles in space you would get much of a bathymetry return, no along track product had been developed for bathymetry as a specific surface similar to land ice and sea ice and land. This transect here is the satellites moving from the left to the right on the blue line across the coast of Mexico. You can see here in the transect in the bottom right where you get the structure from the trees, and then we're getting the water land interface, the coastal shoreline, the sea surface. Certainly we get the dynamic ocean waves and the structure on the sea surface, as well as then the shallow water bathymetry beneath the water. This is another picture I like. Sometimes we just sit around and look at data all day because it seems really, it's just really fun. This is then the Florida Keys. There's a lot of variability in the bathy returns. You have the normal ambient noise, which fills all of this uniform noise here. You also have sometimes, depending on the state of the sea surface, it's very reflective or very dark, depending. The bathymetry, you could see here underneath the surface of the water, it's not the normal noisy return, the ambient noise, but representative of the water column turbidity. So it could be biologics, it could be particulates, it could be sediment. And there's been a lot of really interesting studies about how can that be best analyzed for discoveries of benthic habitats. If the other interesting thing about bathymetry is scale matters, right? The topographic scale is amazing. If I just blow up this green box and replot it down here in the corner, you can see how different it looks. So it's been a lot of, expanding and contracting to just try to find the interesting features beneath the water surface. If we do get transects that coincide, we can do change detection in the along track direction. So this is showing in the Northern Marianas, we have an ascending pass and a descending pass. Ascending pass happened just last year, and then the descending pass was in 2020. Because these are geolocated ATL-03 products, we can do change detection, but it's really hard to just get those single points to say something really about the geomorphology that's happening along a full coastline when we're just measuring a small transect. So one of the things that has really taken hold is using ISAT-2 in context of satellite-derived bathymetry. So SDB, satellite-derived bathymetry, is using multispectral data and looking at the relative downwelling radiance of different bands, and those ratios tell you something about the depth or relative depth. And so you can get wide-reaching depth maps or bathymetry maps in certain areas of interest. This is really great, but it's a relative measurement or a relative depth, and you need seed points or ground control points to tie down these relative numbers to absolute numbers to be really effective and understand best the geomorphology. ISAT-2 is now providing those seed depths at a global scale. So all of that, the ISAT-2 can be used as input for in conjunction with the optical data for wider bathy maps. Nathan Thomas, Maryland and colleagues have done this, doing a whole spaceborne approach of using Sentinel-2 and ISAT-2 data to create these really amazing depth maps. This happens to be over the Grand Bahamas. And he's done it in a way that is not site specific of having an actual ISAT-2 measurement, but can learn from those impacts of ISAT-2 data on the spectral data and producing these really high resolution maps that haven't before been available. So the one thing I wanted to talk about was ATL-24. And as I mentioned, there was no along track bathymetry product in production in all those years that we were developing for the other surfaces, but through the extended mission portfolio, we are going to create this along track bathymetry product. I'm happy to be working on this with my team here at UT Austin and in collaboration with Chris Parrish and his team at Oregon State University. The idea is to provide this level 3 data product, and we will provide it at a full resolution, 70 centimeters, because I think that highest resolution is really important for some of the fine scale features that you want to see on the seafloor or within the water surface and water column. But it's been a big lift. We've been working on it for a little while and just trying to get proof of concept for each of the different kind of modules or algorithms that will have to be linked together for a full workflow and be robust enough for global application as these along track products need to be. To start, some of the algorithms that we're looking to do is pull out those statistics from the waves or the ocean surface. You see here all of these points, these photons on the plot on the right are the water surface, and we can analyze those. We can do a frequency spectrum or wavelet analysis shown here on the left, which can estimate the wavelength, which in this case is about where the bright spots, yellow spots are at 250 meters wavelength, and do wave height and other environmental parameterization. This is really hard problem, I will say, because it's how do you find it? What we're noticing now as we start to develop the algorithm to produce the data product is that it's requiring a whole lot of pre-processing on the ATL-03 input. We'll need to do our own signal finding. We need to do our own approach to the surface classification, similar to how ATL-08 did it for vegetation and terrain. One of the first things we need to do is figure out how to filter out all the clouds, because any cloud presence either causes data dropouts or it causes the telemetry, either just because of occlusion, or it causes the telemetry window to bump up and center on the cloud surface and miss what's below. This is plot here in the middle is cloudy photon data, and you can just see how messy it is relative to what data is telemetred down versus the reference digital elevation model here in this red line. So we need to figure out a way to filter out the no data locations for a better surface model. And we also need to do land filtering, like how do we find the coastline? You don't want to be looking for bathymetry way inland. We need some way to guide or mask where this processing is going to occur. Once we do that pre-processing, then we can move on to signal finding, and we can generate surfaces for the sea surface, the sea floor. We'll classify those as such and then do a refraction correction. And then we'll do the environmental characterization of waves, as I mentioned, turbidity, and then potentially can do change detection. So it seemed very, it was a big problem to do shoreline detection. This is a hard thing because there's so many different, you can see here on these example plots here of the ocean surface meeting land, and then we have bathymetry. There's just some very complex geometries here. But I have a PhD student in the aerospace department, Jonathan Markle, and he last year was awarded a NASA Finest Award, which is for graduate students in earth science. And his goal was to explore Arctic coastal erosion using ISAT-2. And a really important area of study, kind of a hotspot of climate change, and something that's not as easily. There's a lack of data and knowledge in what's really going on. But it also required us to do some of those things that I just mentioned in terms of algorithm development. So he could go in and get enough data in an automated fashion and look at those changes over time in the coastal environment in this region. What he came up with was I think, quite brilliant. And he's doing something called an anomaly detection, that is a course level elevation changes and finds those interface where you have jumps in elevation or non-similarities. Points of non-similarity, and he uses things like elevation, but he also will look at slope and aspect ratio. Basically what he does, when I say a course resolution, he's doing a variable resolution, a long track window finding to identify these anomalies, and then labels those segments in between the anomaly points as what he knows is a sure thing. So here in this transect where he's labeling in this particular region what he knows is water, and he's coloring by the blue color. And then what he knows is land, just based on these simple parameters, and the in between the sections of the anomaly points is the green. And then he looks further at surface similarity and correlation. Those segments that he can't for sure identify, which, I mean, rough ocean looks a lot like flat land. He puts through a K nearest neighbor approach with some feature engineering of the parameters that we're pulling out to fill in the gaps and then get kind of a full surface of land and bathymetry combination. So here's an example in Siberia, and this top output from his anomaly detection and segmentation, if you will, is working pretty well. You can see, I think this is all water. It's labeled blue, and the green seems like land, but the red are those not yet classified. So he runs the KNN on the red segments and then fills in what the KNN's information is providing us. And it's turning out to be very robust and pretty accurate. So the example here with these lines, ISAT-2 lines, each of the dots indicate the interface between segments. So separating out the land and water. And we're just really pleased with this because, and I'm showing you one example. I think I have another example here, which is pretty cool. The salt evaporation ponds, the Dead Sea. These retainer walls are about 1 meter in height. You can see them here in the transect in the middle, but it's capturing all of those areas where there's the interface pretty accurately with water and land. There's some more work to do here, and it's in some cases not exact, but I think it's a really significant achievement to do this, because the deal is now we don't have to rely on ancillary data products to tell us where the land mask meets the water mask, and can start looking at shoreline, coastal erosion or shoreline changes over time without bringing in any potential uncertainties or maybe coarser resolution maps. I think I've said most of that. This is a critical step for 3D coastal analysis with ISAT-2 in our minds, and we didn't want to be tied to ancillary land masks, if you will, or bathymetry maps looking for bathy, and this will go in and automatically pick out what, in a pretty thorough way, what we think is water and what we think is land. So this is again, big step, and kudos to Jonathan Markle for discovering a pretty robust method. And then I wanted to leave you with something fun. It's funny that Kelly is on the line, but when I was running the science team meetings, before every meeting, we would do a competition called the favorite feature find in ISAT-2 data. It got really competitive. It was super fun, and you won't believe the things you can find in this data set. But Kelly found a airplane hangar in Germany that was built in 1938, and now it's the world's largest indoor water park. You can see that some of the metal frame of the structure was replaced by a clear polymer. So actually the ISAT-2 laser could go into the water park. And here's a transect on the bottom right of the 6 beams over the structure. And there's a bunch of stuff going on. But if we look here, she zoomed in, and you can actually, here on the clear side of the hangar, it's measuring the pool surface and the pool floor. So we know that it's a 2-meter pool. We got the buses on the side. So as she would say, what better is a talk that can end with bathymetry in a building with ISAT-2? and I copied her, but I thought it stuck with me ever since she said that. In conclusion, I hope that you agree with me that it's just ISAT-2 is providing really unprecedented resource to a full level of a broad range of science disciplines. And I'm pleased to report that everything is nominal. We're going to report or develop a long track bathymetry product, ATL24. I didn't really talk about this except for the laser lifetime, meaning the energy level looks really good. We have a lot of margin there, and we also have a redundant laser on board. So that certainly in terms of consumables is not going to be the limiting lifetime component. For fuel, we use fuel on a regular basis, typically for drag makeup maneuvers or station keeping, but that's been less than what was anticipated. So we do have fuel reserves that's estimated to last to 2037 in ideal conditions. And so I think we can all get excited about a long life of laser altimetry from Atlas and ISAT-2 moving in the future. And with that, I will say thank you and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand or you can just unmute yourself and ask it. Or alternatively, you can type your question in the chat or just chat me and tell me you want to ask a question. Oh, go ahead, Reedon.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dwi. It's nice talk, and this is new for me. It's really good. I wonder, maybe I missed one of the slide or something. What is the repeat satellite, and then how fast it's moving in terms of a long track?
Great questions. So the orbit provides a 91-day repeat orbit. And that then you get 1,387 orbits within those 3-month period, but there's 33-day subcycles in terms of near repeats or uniform distribution of the ground tracks across the surface. So that's the repeat. And then it's in a low Earth orbit at, I think the mean is 496 kilometers. That is the equivalent of 7.5 kilometers per second is how fast it's moving.
Oh.
But I don't know that in miles per hour. I should figure that out. That would be interesting. Kelly, do you know that? I don't know. I could get a calculator.
I don't. That's a good question.
So within 3 months, that means we have the repeat in the same line. So that suppose, let's say, they have a cloud during that day. You know, it can be corrected during the next 3 months.
That's correct, but I will caveat that a little bit.
Oh.
So there's part of the level 1 science requirements of ISAT-2 was to provide a distributed collection of canopy heights in, I'll say, mid-latitudes. And so there is a pointing strategy for the mid-latitudes to fill in the gaps between those 1,387 tracks. Those then don't repeat. There are some cycles, 3-month cycles, that do exactly repeat each other to look at change detection in vegetation or terrain, for example. But otherwise, there's not every 3 months a repeat between about 60 degrees north and south. That's a little bit variable. In the polar regions, though, there's exact repeats. That's very important to recover time series of elevation change. And so those every 3 months, there's an exact repeat with respect.
Oh, so in the tropic, it will not be exact repeat.
There'll be a few repeats, but not on a consistent basis because of the pointing strategies. The other thing I'll say that's really cool about ISAT-2 is that there's opportunity to do targets of our opportunity, meaning upload coordinates that you're interested in close proximity to where the satellite's flying, and the satellite can do a roll maneuver and illuminate that target. We always joke, like, if I want to hit my mom's house in Kansas, I can put in a target of opportunity and the satellite will roll and just hit the top of the house.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I got one for you, Lori.
Great.
I think you were talking about change detection with ATL-24.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about offshore? Are you talking about bathymetric change? And if so, how are you kind of separating temporal influences on like index of refraction? Like if that changes from past to past just a little bit, how do you account for that in change detection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so corrections are a big deal because you have to have a relevant correction at a given time or collect. We're trying to you can do, I don't know what to call it, but you can do a real simple refraction whereby you just take whatever depth you think you're seeing and multiply it by 0.75, and that's about the depth. But we're trying to do a more rigorous refraction correction with looking at incidence angle and the wave surface structure and how that might impact it. I don't know if we'll pull in that case, other ancillary data sets with temperature or salinity measurements. Those are pretty coarse, so it makes it pretty difficult. I think it is a hard problem to disentangle like the geomorphology, that change of just given like the waves on that day versus did something actually change in the seafloor. I think the satellite-derived bathymetry change maps are the way to go in a way and constrain those depths more precisely where we can difference the surface models rather than just track lines that may or may not be right along the same position each time. Did that answer your question?
No, I think just some of your overall prefaces of it's hard, really hard. Bathymetry is hard.
It is. It's fun. It's hard.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, well, thank you to everyone for coming, and thank you so much to our speaker, Dr. Magruder, for giving us this great talk today. Learned a lot about ISAT-2. And for everyone else, have a great afternoon. Please return next week as our seminar series continues. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Good to see you, Kelly.
Good seeing you, Lori.